liquid inside slosh dangerously close to the rim. Have you noticed how they slouch when they walk among us? How they try to make themselves smaller? They deliberately slow their movements, soften their voices, and go out of their way to appear non-threatening. Fascinating. Zrel's voice dripped with sarcasm. And I suppose next you'll tell me that the cosmic wolf decided to become a vegetarian. No, you don't understand! Catlix was practically vibrating with excitement now. I've been studying their historical records. Did you know they have this concept called diplomatic courtesy? They actually developed formal rules about how to be polite to species that are, objectively speaking, weaker than them. The gathering of alien diplomats in the station's observation lounge fell silent, their attention caught by Catlix's words. Through the vast window behind them, the blue-green marble of Earth hung suspended in space, looking deceptively peaceful from this distance. That's disturbing, muttered Representative Ix, their gelatinous form rippling with unease. Why would they bother? Because, a new voice cut in, making several diplomats jump. We learned a long time ago that being the biggest and strongest doesn't always make you right. The assembled aliens turned to see Ambassador James Rodriguez standing in the doorway, his large frame deliberately casual, hands stuffed in his pockets in what they had all learned was a universal human gesture of non-aggression. The fact that he had managed to approach so silently despite his species' notorious weight and density was unsettling. Please, he said with a disarming smile, don't let me interrupt. This is actually a fascinating conversation. Though I should point out that Earth isn't really that bad. I mean, sure, we have earthquakes, hurricanes, and the occasional volcanic eruption, but you have organisms that can kill with a single touch, Zrel interjected. Well, yes, but your planet randomly throws rocks from space at its surface. The dinosaurs had it worse, honestly. Your atmospheric phenomena include spinning columns of death. Ah, tornadoes. Yeah, those are pretty wild. And yet, Catlix interrupted, mandibles clicking rapidly. Here you are, Ambassador Rodriguez, making yourself smaller, speaking softly, trying not to startle us. Why? The human's smile shifted slightly, taking on an edge that made several of the gathered diplomats unconsciously edge away. Because, Ambassador Catlix, my species learned something very important during our evolution. Just because you can dominate others doesn't mean you should. But surely it must be frustrating, pressed Catlix. To constantly restrain yourselves? Rodriguez laughed, and the sound made primitive danger responses fire in several alien nervous systems. Not really. It's actually kind of fun, like a game. Besides, he added, his voice dropping to what humans called a stage whisper, it makes it so much more impressive when we actually do decide to show what we can do. The silence that followed was profound enough that you could have heard a pin drop, if anyone had been brave enough to drop one. You're joking, Ix said finally. This is that human humor thing, yes? Am I? Rodriguez's smile widened. You know, there's an old Earth saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. It was coined by one of our leaders a few centuries ago. The idea is that you should be polite and diplomatic, while making sure everyone knows you're capable of defending yourself if needed. And the humans consider this wise? Zrel's eyestalks were now fully extended, a sign of intense interest. Oh yes, very wise, because you see... Rodriguez was interrupted by his communicator chirping. His expression changed as he read the message, all pretense of casualness vanishing in an instant. The assembled diplomats felt their various circulatory organs skip a beat at the transformation. I apologize, he said, his voice now clipped and professional. But I'm going to have to cut this fascinating discussion short. It seems the Grax Collective has decided to test whether we're actually as soft as we appear. His smile returned, but now it was all teeth. They've just launched an attack on one of our colony worlds. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. What? Catlix's mandibles froze mid-click. Oh yes, apparently they interpreted our diplomatic courtesy as weakness. Rodriguez straightened to his full height, no longer making any attempt to appear non-threatening. The assembled diplomats suddenly remembered that humans were, on average, significantly larger than most spacefaring species. If you'll excuse me, I need to coordinate with Earth Command. We're about to provide an object lesson in why confusing politeness with weakness is a very, very bad idea. As he strode from the room, his footsteps no longer carefully muted but ringing against the deck plates, Catlix turned to Zrel. I believe I now understand why their historical records contain so many variations of the phrase, fuck around and find out. The next few hours were educational. The gathered diplomats watched in stunned silence as the massive view screens in the emergency session chamber displayed the human response to the Grax incursion. Gone was any trace of the careful restraint they had grown accustomed to seeing from their Deathworlder colleagues. Are they using their cargo ships as weapons? Ix burbled in disbelief. Technically, Rodriguez explained, now standing proud and straight as he narrated the events. Those are modified cargo ships. We started converting civilian vessels for military use about 10 minutes after the attack began. Amazing what you can do with a few fusion drives and some creative thinking about kinetic energy. On the screen, a massive transport vessel accelerated to relativistic speeds, its fusion drive glowing like a newborn star. The Grax fleet, apparently not expecting a civilian craft to be capable of such acceleration, failed to evade in time. The resulting collision converted both ships into an expanding cloud of plasma. That's impossible, Catlix chittered. The power requirements alone. Oh, that's nothing, Rodriguez said cheerfully. Watch this next part. This is where we demonstrate why you should never, ever make humans angry enough to stop playing nice. The screens showed a new fleet of ships emerging from FTL, proper human warships this time. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible for vessels of their size, executing maneuvers that made several of the watching diplomats feel distinctly nauseated. Are those ships dancing? Zrel asked weakly. Formation combat, Rodriguez corrected. Though I suppose it does look a bit like dancing. We found that most species expect space combat to be slow and stately, like a game of chess. We prefer it to be more like… What's a good analogy? Ah yes, more like a bar fight. As if to emphasize his point, one of the human vessels executed a spine-twisting turn that should have torn it apart, fired its main weapons while facing backward, then used the recoil to launch itself into an even more impossible maneuver. That's not… Ships shouldn't be able to… Catlix's mandibles were clicking so fast they were becoming a blur. Oh, but they can, Rodriguez said, his smile now positively predatory. You see, when we humans design weapons, we start with what we want them to do, then figure out how to make physics cooperate, sometimes rather aggressively. The screens showed the Grax fleet attempting to retreat. Their ships, while technically more advanced in many ways than human vessels, were clearly not designed for this type of combat. They moved like proper spacefaring vessels should, which meant they were hopelessly outmatched against opponents who treated the laws of physics more like polite suggestions. Should we attempt to negotiate a ceasefire? Ix suggested tentatively. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Oh, we already offered them one, right after they attacked our colony. Would you like to hear their response? He tapped a control, and the Grax commander's voice filled the chamber. Your species' pretense at civility fooled no one, humans. We saw through your act of playing at being civilized. Now you will learn the price of… Rodriguez cut off the recording. They didn't get to finish their speech. That was when we demonstrated our new point defense systems. His smile turned reminiscent. You know, it's interesting. Most species develop energy weapons as their primary armament and kinetic weapons as backup. We humans did it the other way around. There's something elegantly simple about just throwing things really, really fast. On the screens, the battle, if it could still be called that, was winding down. The remaining Grax ships were surrendering, their crews apparently having received a rapid education in why some species evolved to be apex predators. And now, Rodriguez said, his voice taking on a formal tone, if you'll excuse me, I need to help coordinate the relief efforts for our colony. The Grax didn't manage to do much damage, but there are still people who need help. As he turned to leave, Catlix called out, Ambassador, one question, if I may? Rodriguez paused. Of course. When you said earlier that humans find it fun to pretend to be less dangerous than you are, were you serious? The human's laugh made several diplomats flinch. Oh yes, absolutely serious. Think about it. What's more impressive? Being scary because you're big and strong, or being scary because everyone knows you're big and strong but choose not to make a big deal about it? He left them to ponder that, his footsteps once again deliberately quiet, his posture once again carefully non-threatening. Behind him, the assembled diplomats watched Earth's gravity well-curving space around it on the main view screen, and thought about predators, and politeness, and the wisdom of not poking sleeping giants. You know what's really terrifying? Catlix said finally. They're going right back to being nice now. After all that, after showing us what they're really capable of. they're going to go right back to slouching and speaking softly and pretending to be harmless. Not pretending, Zrel corrected, their eyestalks swiveling thoughtfully. Choosing, there's a difference. They paused. I think I finally understand why their diplomatic credentials include warnings about fucking around and finding out. Indeed, Catlix agreed. I suspect the Grax Collective has just earned itself a very prominent place in future diplomatic training materials. Under what not to do? Ix suggested. Under why we're polite to humans, Catlix corrected. And why we're very, very grateful that they choose to be polite back. Through the station's windows, Earth continued its serene orbit, looking for all the world like it wasn't home to a species that had just demonstrated why politeness should never be mistaken for weakness. In the distance, the cleanup of the battle was already beginning, human ships moving with their usual carefully restrained grace. The assembled diplomats watched and remembered that humans had a saying about the quietest people being the most dangerous. They also remembered that humans had a lot of sayings about the importance of being nice. They were beginning to understand why. Did you know? Catlix announced to the diplomatic lounge 3 standard weeks after the Grax incident. That humans have an entire military protocol called aggressive politeness? Zrel, who had been peacefully enjoying their morning nutrient solution, nearly aspirated it through their eyestalks. They have what? Oh yes! Catlix's mandibles clicked excitedly. I've been doing research since, well, you know. The gathered diplomats did know. None of them had quite been able to forget the day they watched humans demonstrate why apex predators don't need to prove anything to anyone. It's fascinating. They actually have formal military guidelines about being excessively courteous to potential hostiles. That makes no tactical sense, muttered Representative Ix, their gelatinous form rippling with confusion. Actually, it makes perfect sense, came a new voice. This time, the assembled diplomats were proud of themselves for only jumping slightly when they realized Ambassador Rodriguez had once again managed to enter silently, despite his species' density. It's psychological warfare at its finest. Do explain. Zrel's eyestalks swiveled with interest. Rodriguez settled into one of the reinforced chairs designed for human use, deliberately maintaining his species' now familiar facade of careful harmlessness. Well, think about it. When someone who can demonstrably tear you apart decides to be unfailingly polite instead, it creates a certain tension. Like being in a room with a predator that's choosing not to eat you? Catlix suggested. Exactly, Rodriguez beamed. Though I should point out that we don't actually eat other sentients. That would be rude. The way he said it made several diplomats shift uncomfortably. Besides, he continued cheerfully, the aggressive politeness protocols have prevented more conflicts than they've started. There's something uniquely terrifying about receiving a message that begins with, "We regret to inform you," and ends with "kind regards," when you know it's coming from a species that can turn your ships inside out. Is that what you sent to the Grax? Ix inquired, unable to contain their curiosity. Oh no, Rodriguez's smile took on that predatory edge they'd seen during the incident. They didn't give us time for proper letterhead, but their surviving leadership has been receiving very polite diplomatic correspondence since then, complete with proper formatting and everything. How thoughtful of you, Zrel managed. We try to be, Rodriguez agreed. Did you know we're actually helping them rebuild? Their economy was rather dependent on military expansion, so we're providing assistance in transitioning to more peaceful industries. Very politely, of course. Of course, Catlix clicked. And I assume this assistance is entirely voluntary on their part. Oh, absolutely. We simply made some very polite suggestions about the benefits of peace and cooperation, while our fleet was conducting equally polite training exercises near their borders. Rodriguez's smile widened. They were very receptive to our diplomatic overtures. I imagine they were, Ix burbled. And these training exercises? Standard stuff, Rodriguez waved dismissively. Just some basic maneuvers. Though we did demonstrate a few new techniques we developed during the recent unpleasantness. Purely for educational purposes, you understand. The gathered diplomats did understand. They understood very well. But enough about that, Rodriguez continued, his posture shifting back to the carefully non-threatening stance they were used to. Who's interested in learning about human diplomatic gift-giving customs? We have this fascinating tradition called passive-aggressive gift baskets. Before he could elaborate, his communicator chirped again. That was quick, Catlix observed. Amazing what a little politeness can accomplish, Rodriguez agreed. Though the fusion drive demonstrations probably helped too. Nothing motivates peaceful dialogue quite like watching cargo ships pull off maneuvers your best military vessels can't match. About those cargo ships, Zrel began cautiously. We've been meaning to ask. Yes? Were they actually converted civilian vessels, or... Rodriguez's smile could have taught masterclasses in pleasant ambiguity. Now that would be telling, wouldn't it? Let's just say that humans have a lot of experience with looking harmless while being prepared for anything. We find it's better that way. Keeps everyone polite. He stood, smoothing his diplomatic uniform with practiced care. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to draft our response to the Grax apology. We want to strike just the right tone of friendly encouragement and historical reminder. As he left, once again moving with that deliberate quietness that they now understood was entirely voluntary, Catlix turned to the others. I've been studying human languages, they announced. Did you know they have over 50 different ways to say please and thank you in English alone? And each one can mean anything from genuine gratitude to, I'm trying very hard not to demonstrate what happened to the last person who annoyed me. Fascinating, Ix rippled, and slightly terrifying. That, said Zrel, appears to be humanity's preferred diplomatic strategy. Through the window, Earth continued its rotation, sunlight glinting off the oceans that had spawned a species that understood that true power lies not in showing strength, but in having the confidence to be polite instead. In the distance, a human diplomatic vessel was departing the station, its engines barely appearing to strain despite the power they all now knew they contained. Its transponder broadcast a friendly greeting to all nearby ships, written in multiple languages and formatted with exquisite politeness. Several passing vessels adjusted their course to give it a wider berth than strictly necessary. Just to be polite, of course. After all, it never hurts to be courteous, especially to a species that had elevated politeness to an art form, backed by the kind of capabilities that made that politeness a choice rather than a necessity. You know what's really impressive? Catlix mused. They're actually enjoying this. The whole being nice thing. They genuinely prefer it. Of course they do. Zrel's eyestalks bobbed in understanding. They've learned something most species take much longer to figure out. Being nice when you don't have to be is the ultimate power move. In the following weeks, the Galactic Diplomatic Corps noted a marked increase in the use of formal pleasantries among all member species. No one officially acknowledged why, but diplomatic correspondence became noticeably more polite across the board. Just in case. After all, as humans like to say, better safe than sorry. And if the humans noticed the increased courtesy, they were too polite to mention it. I've made a disturbing discovery, Catlix announced, bursting into the diplomatic lounge with such urgency that their auxiliary legs were actually touching the floor. A rare breach of Vrick's etiquette. More disturbing than the cargo ship incident? Ix burbled skeptically. The Grax incident had become their standard metric for disturbing revelations about humans. Different kind of disturbing. Catlix's mandibles clicked rapidly. I've been analyzing human diplomatic documentation, and I've discovered that they have an entire classified protocol called weaponized hospitality. Zrel, who had been about to sample a human beverage called coffee that they'd recently grown fond of, carefully set their cup down. They have what now? It's brilliant, actually, Catlix continued, settling into their customary perch. They've systematically cataloged every species' comfort requirements, social taboos, and physiological limitations. Not for warfare, but for entertaining. That doesn't sound so bad, Ix ventured. You don't understand. Catlix's antennae quivered. They've turned being a good host into a military-grade psychological operation. Did you know they once prevented a war with the Proxian hegemony by hosting a diplomatic dinner that was so perfectly calibrated to Proxian cultural standards that their high commander broke down and admitted to the planned invasion? Surely you're exaggerating. Zrel's eyestalks swiveled skeptically. Not even slightly, came the now familiar voice of Ambassador Rodriguez. This time, the assembled diplomats didn't even pretend to be surprised by his silent arrival. They'd accepted it as one of those human things, like their ability to smile while delivering threats, or their habit of turning civilian ships into relativistic weapons. The Proxian incident is actually one of our favorite case studies at the Diplomatic Academy, Rodriguez continued, settling into his usual chair with that carefully choreographed impression of harmlessness. Though I should point out that it wasn't just the dinner, it was the entire weekend of perfectly orchestrated hospitality. Do tell, Catlix urged, mandibles clicking in anticipation. Well, Rodriguez smiled. It turns out that when you demonstrate intimate knowledge of a species' customs, while simultaneously showing them footage of your cargo ships doing physics-defying maneuvers. It sends a very clear message about your intelligence-gathering capabilities. And the Proxians just gave up? Ix's gelatinous form rippled with disbelief. Oh no, nothing so crude. Rodriguez's smile widened. They formally requested an alliance. After all, any species that can weaponize hospitality is either a valuable friend or a terrifying enemy. They chose the safer option. That's... Zrel searched for the right word. Diabolical. We prefer diplomatically innovative, Rodriguez corrected gently. Did you know we're hosting the Galactic Diplomatic Corps annual gala next month? We're very excited about it. We've been studying everyone's preferences very carefully. The way he said studying made several diplomats wonder if they should update their species' threat assessments of human social events. I assume, Ketlix ventured, that this gathering will be thoroughly documented? Oh yes, Rodriguez beamed, complete with high-resolution recordings of all attendees enjoying our hospitality. For the historical archives, you understand. The assembled diplomats did understand. They understood with crystal clarity. But surely, Ix burbled hopefully, this is all just standard diplomatic procedure? Every species maintains records of such events? Of course, Rodriguez agreed smoothly. Though I should mention that our new orbital defense platforms make excellent camera platforms. The resolution is remarkable. We can capture every detail of visiting ships, purely for identification purposes, naturally. Naturally, Zrel's eyestalks drooped slightly. Speaking of which, Rodriguez continued cheerfully, we've been meaning to discuss updating the standard diplomatic vessel recognition protocols. We've noticed some inconsistencies in various species' transponder signatures. Nothing serious, of course, but we'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings. The emphasis he placed on that last word made several diplomats recall exactly what had happened to the Grax ships that had misunderstood human capabilities. I'm sure we can arrange a comprehensive review, Catlix offered quickly. Excellent! Rodriguez clapped his hands, the sharp sound making several diplomats flinch. We'll add it to the gala agenda, right after the demonstration of our new civilian space traffic control system. The pause before civilian was brief but noticeable. Now, if you'll excuse me, he stood with his usual careful grace. I need to finish reviewing the seating arrangements for the gala. Did you know that the statistical probability of diplomatic incidents drops by 73% when you properly account for each species' preferred proximity to potential rival delegations? Fascinating stuff. As he left, Ix turned their amorphous form toward Catlix. You know what's truly terrifying? They've basically turned being nice into a superweapon. More than that, Catlix clicked thoughtfully. They've systematized it, categorized it, turned courtesy into a science backed by military-grade analysis. And they're going to demonstrate it all at the gala, Zrel added glumly. While recording everything, Catlix agreed. From multiple angles, Ix burbled. With their civilian monitoring systems, Zrel's eyestalks drooped further. They sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the implications of a species that had not only mastered the art of being terrifying while being nice, but had apparently turned it into a formally documented strategic doctrine. You know what the worst part is? Catlix finally said. I checked their historical records. They've been doing this since before they achieved spaceflight. There are accounts of human diplomatic functions being used to prevent conflicts going back centuries. So what you're saying, Ix rippled thoughtfully, is that by the time they reached the stars, they'd already perfected the art of weaponized hospitality. Catlix confirmed. The Grax never stood a chance. They mistook excessive politeness for weakness, not realizing they were seeing the diplomatic equivalent of a predator's warning display. Through the station's windows, they could see Earth's night side coming into view, city lights tracing patterns across the continents. Somewhere down there, humans were undoubtedly planning the upcoming gala with the same meticulous attention to detail they applied to their military operations. I've made a decision, Zrel announced suddenly. I'm going to attend the gala. Really? Catlix's mandibles clicked in surprise. Even knowing it's basically a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation? Especially because of that. Zrel's eyestalks bobbed firmly. Think about it. What's more dangerous, letting them gather information about you while you're being perfectly polite, or making them work harder to get that information? The logic was impeccable. After all, humans had a saying about keeping your friends close and your enemies closer, though nobody was quite sure anymore which category they fell into. the species that was so unfailingly nice that they had turned courtesy itself into a strategic asset. In the following days, the gala's attendance confirmations reached unprecedented levels. No one explicitly acknowledged why, but every major species made sure to send their most diplomatically adept representatives. Just to be polite, of course. After all, as humans had taught them, true civilization isn't about not being dangerous. It's about being dangerous and choosing to be nice instead, and taking very, very detailed records of everyone who appreciates that niceness. The end.